I'm going to begin by introducing our first speaker, who is our new president and principal, Professor Shitij. Professor Shitij Kapur, to open proceedings. Thank you, sir.
I don't know why I deserve that applause, but thank you very much for offering it nonetheless. And today is a great occasion. I think a 60th anniversary of anything is wonderful, but a 60th anniversary of a department is truly remarkable. And it's great to see so many of you here today. And I think your presence reflects the achievements of the department, but more importantly, the pride that all of you take in being members of it or being associated with it, and the honor it is for the rest of us who weren't members or directly associated to be associated with something that has done so well for such a long period of time. The Department of War Studies, as you know, is the world's leading academic institution for the study of war and conflict. And its success owes much to its founder, Sir Michael Howard, one of Britain's most eminent and celebrated historians, but also to his approach, his holistic approach, his stressing the wider context and the need that this be an interdisciplinary enterprise rather than a narrow one. Now, I understand that Sir Michael Howard was closely associated with the department even after his retirement, was actively engaged till 2019, when he sadly passed away. So I think all we can hope for is that wherever he is today, he be looking upon us with smile and a pride in what he has been able to set and what it has become. And I understand that war studies at King's started first after the First World War, somewhere around 1927, I'm told, and that it has changed over time. That as the nature of conflict and war has changed, the department has changed, its scale, its makeup, its focus has changed. And in the words of Sir Michael Howard, he said, the history of war, I came to realize, was more than the operational history of armed forces. It was the study of entire societies. Only by studying their cultures could one come to understand what it was that they fought about and why they fought in the way that they did. Now, I don't know exactly when Sir Michael Howard said that, but I think those words are prescient because over the last half century, the nature of warfare and conflict has dramatically changed, not just in technology, but who the main actors are. So it's remarkable that your department has evolved along those times. And in 1982, of course, our very own Sir Lawrence Freedman, who was a former doctoral student of Howard's at Oxford, was appointed to the chair of war studies and the head of department. And under Laurie's leadership, war studies became a mainstream academic subject, and the Department of War Studies became one of the largest departments at King's. And I have to tell you, I wasn't at King's when all of this was happening. I was at the University of Toronto. And at the University of Toronto, I knew King's only for two things: war studies and psychiatry. I happen to be a psychiatrist. So you would expect me to know about psychiatry, but you wouldn't expect me to know about war studies, but it is. This is something that we've now done for a long time that the world around us knows us so well for. So over the years, notable figures have passed through the offices and the teaching rooms of our department, people like Thomas Schelling, Richard Rosencrantz, Morton Halpern, names that you would know well. And today, we have over 100 full-time academic staff, over 40 professional service members of staff, 1,500 undergraduate and postgraduate students, and Michael tells me this year that might be 1,600, which just speaks to how highly sought after you are as a place, as a community, to come and study and to come and learn. So not surprisingly, the department is a home to people from the ages of 18 to 70 as students. And they come from different backgrounds, from different faiths, from different ethnicities, nationalities. But it's really your collective enthusiasm and dedication to study conflict in all of its forms that shines through. Now, in 1992, I think Fukuyama said, in The End of History, he thought, that's it. Western liberal democracies have solved the problem. We know what the shape of history is going to be, and perhaps we put conflict behind us. And I think 30 years later, one could see how wrong he was. Perhaps And sadly, and this is where psychiatry comes in, perhaps sadly, it is human to have conflict. And that conflict will be with us. Its nature, its form, its technologies might change, but sadly, it might well be that it is inherently human to be in conflict. And therefore, it remains necessary that we continue to study conflict in all its forms and its changing forms. And therefore, it's important that not only do we look to the past to thank those who've contributed to make this department the great department it is, not only look to the present to celebrate those of you who are continuing that tradition, but also look to the future to anticipate the new things that will happen, the new students we will need who will take the work forward. So I'm delighted that as a part of the 60th anniversary celebrations to set a path for the future, the department is launching the War Studies Futures Scholarship Program, which will support our commitment to admitting students with the greatest potential regardless of background. So this will aim to provide scholarships for 6 students from low-income, widening participation backgrounds each year for the next 10 years. And you do your math, 6 times 10 is 60. So that's a good way to celebrate your 60th anniversary, though I realize by the time we'll get there, it will be your 70th anniversary, so we'll have to put in some more. But successful students will receive a scholarship of £12,000 to help with the cost of living in London and to contribute towards their annual tuition fees. But I think whether we look to the past or whether we look to the present or the future, our main task remains the same. It is providing the highest quality of scholarship about modern conflict in its broadest sense, and equipping our students with the skills and knowledge so that they can then make meaningful contributions to society through careers in government, in international organizations, in the charity sector, in media, in security, and private sectors. And I think as a university, we should not be precious where our students go. We should be precious that they use the knowledge we've provided to the ends that they find purposeful. So with that, I will thank all those who've contributed to giving this department the prominence and the eminence and the service to society that it has done. I celebrate all of you who are here as previous members of this department, current members, and the students, but I also anticipate the very bright future ahead of you. And one person who will get you there is your next head of department, to whom I now hand.
Very much, Shitij. I should have said at the beginning 2 announcements. One is if there is a fire alarm, do panic because it will be a real fire alarm, not a test. If it does go off, we need to walk down the stairs over there. I should also say that while there's about 80 of us in the room, this is being streamed live on our YouTube channel to however many people that gets to, and it's on the Twitter sphere. And one of the things we're keen to do as well is try and get War Studies Twitter account up to 60,000 followers, and we're on 52,000, I think, at the moment. So keep going with that. As I said at the start, it's a great honour to be head of department. It's very funny standing here and seeing Barry Paskins in the audience. I've lost track of where he is. Over there at the back, I remember my first day in War Studies for the job interview back in 2004. It was a horrible wet day. We were in the old Norfolk building, which is around the corner somewhere, which used to be an old hotel. It was very scabby and ugly at that stage. And I walked in very nervous the night before. I remember thinking I was very modern at those days, using an overhead projector page in colour, which I'm sure our students don't even know what I'm talking about. And I had this terrible fear that you'd put it down upside down or back to front or both, and everyone would laugh. And I looked up and the room was absolutely packed. And there was Barry in a bright yellow coat, socks and sandals, despite the rain. And I thought, you know what, that sort of feels like home. And War Studies has been home ever since. And one of the remarkable things about the department, I think, is this sense of community it brings into us. I was walking around with Shitij at the start, and we were speaking to some of the old War Studies hands. And the first question was, when did you join? And I thought we should have on our badges, actually. I've done 20 years solid service, or 30 years, or in Barry's case, 40 plus years. And War Studies, I think, leaves an indelible mark on those who have been through it. The number of people that have been students and gone back as staff, the number who have been staff have gone away and decided the pull is too great and have come back. And I think what it does is, despite the fact that we study conflict, we study war and security, we're really a community. And one of the things that has amazed me more than anything over the last year and a half is how the War Studies community has grown. We were very, very keen back in March as COVID sort of erupted on the scene that we would move every single module online and that all of our students, wherever they were in the world, whether they could come to London or not, would be able to study remotely. And similarly, we have moved everything back onto campus now as far as we can. And the idea is that we're really here as a community for students, for staff, people who have studied in the past, people who will come in the future, to really embrace all we do and enjoy and appreciate the work. And we have grown. When Laurie joined in 1982, I think there were 4 members of staff, and he'll perhaps go into those. As Shitij said, we now have well over 100 academic staff. On a Friday, when I send out an update, it goes to 270 people that are on the War Studies staff capsule email address. Over 1,600 students. It's a department that is growing and growing, and I think that poses some very exciting opportunities for the future. One of the other things we did in lockdown was to refurbish the War Studies spaces. And actually, if you go into the room opposite, which we will do after the formal bit and go and have some refreshments, you'll see 2 new portraits which we commissioned. One of Professor Mervyn Frost, who is here, that was painted by his wife Lola, and another of one of our very famous eminent professors, Saki Dockrell, who sadly passed away a number of years ago. We're also delighted that we are commissioning for the first time ever a portrait of Laurie, which, when finished in a couple of months, hopefully will be gigantic and will hang somewhere very prominently, and we can have something to launch that. So do look at those. And it just leaves me to thank a few people. Events like this, they look very simple when you come in and the chairs are out and all the rest of it, but actually it's taken a huge amount of work and effort behind the scenes. So I'd like to thank particularly Lizzie, Aisha, Sanjana and Rachel, who have really done lots of this work, and we had these weekly meetings trying to get this up and ready. And this is the first event of a whole year's worth of celebrations. Hopefully we'll get a football match against the Peace Studies department at Bradford and kick their arse, if I can say that out loud. And there'll be lots of other talks and other things going on. So it just leaves me again to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you for being part of this great community that we've achieved. And, you know, here's to the future. And if I had a drink, I would say here's to the future. So thank you very much. It leaves me now to introduce our main act. If I could introduce this like the boxing chappie would. So in the blue corner, we have Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, head of department in War Studies from 1982 until 1997, which is, you know, having done this job for 2.5 years, I'd be doing it for another sort of 12.5 with Professor Dre. But anyway, and in the red corner, we have Professor Funmi Olonisakin, Vice Principal for Global Engagement, Professor of Security, Leadership and Development, and a graduate of War Studies. So I shall invite you both now to please.
Thank you. First and foremost, I hope everyone can hear me. I'm trying to find my voice. For some reason, I've been losing my voice today, of all days. Let me first and foremost say this feels like some kind of homecoming in a sense, like I've come home for Christmas. For so many reasons, but I'll name 2. This professor, this eminent professor, was my mentor. The only one I knew was, you know, my mentor for a very long time until others joined. And we can talk about those reasons later. I can come back to War Studies and we'll talk about it. But for a second reason, that in this room are people that shaped my own career, shaped my journey at King's. I was at King's War Studies, for 10 years, from 86 to 96. I don't want to explain why it took me 10 years to do a master's and a PhD, but that's a story for another time. And in that period, and at some point you handed over the baton to Christopher Dandekar, my PhD supervisor. So to see you in the room today, a thing of pride. Mervyn Frost is in this room, the head of department after Christopher Dandekar. And I know maybe online you'd have James Gow, who played a very important role in my time at War Studies towards the end. But in this room is Professor Jack Spence, who examined my PhD. Where is Jack? Yes, absolutely. In this room is the man who admitted me to my MA in War Studies. And that, where is he? I can't see him.
No.
Feels, no. Yes. You know, Barry Paskins has a special place behind because of the times, very difficult times that I went to him as my personal tutor, and he talked me through some challenges. That was before I started sitting with Laurie. And I think it's important to talk about this. Phil Sabin, who was only a little bit older than me himself when he started teaching in War Studies, he was a recent PhD graduate. And War Studies still looks pretty much the same because of that familial thing, all right? We can talk about that. But what I'd like us to do is begin to speak to the man who sat at the heart of the expansion of War Studies in so many ways. And that expansion is not just expansion for the sake of expansion. It's expansion for relevance. And those of you who've been part of this journey understand what I'm talking about. I in a sense, when I came in, it was military. We had two special. I had a special course. That's how I met him. My special module was the arms control and disarmament. Then we had military history. And you cannot talk about military history without the two Brians. Brian Holding Reed, Brian Bond. And those who went through this place knew. And then we had the contemporary course. And somehow, that's what I met. And that's what was there for a while. Anyone could have been sitting here today talking to Laurie. I feel privileged to do it because I think, in a sense, I'm a poster child of War Studies. And I'll tell you why later, why I see myself as a poster child. James Gow could have been talking to you. Michael Goodman could have been doing this. John Gerson could have been doing it. A few other people could have been doing this. But I want to claim that right to do it as a poster child of War Studies. But what I want to understand first, so that all of you, you've read this, I brought this out. If you see this history, it is a special history. But to know what underpins it, it's important to go back in time. Because the vision that shaped what became War Studies around in 1960, 61, that vision was a particular kind of vision. And Professor Sir Michael Howard had certain things in mind. In a sense, he was your mentor. But when you came in as chair of War Studies, did you say to yourself, as I'm sure Shitij said to himself when he took over, I'm going to shape this and remap it and make it different? Or did you want to make it different to make the same kind of impact? Or did you want to go in a totally different direction?
So Michael was my mentor, and in a sense, a role model. We didn't study the same things, but Michael, from the moment I can still remember my first supervision at Oxford, where just wonderful rooms at All Souls with books piled around him. When I mentioned a name, he knew them personally, and in the middle of it, the phone rang, and it was some journalist about which, and he started talking to this journalist about something, or he seemed to know what he was talking about, and then he said, "I'm sorry, if this goes on much longer, I'm going to have to charge." And I thought, I want to be able to do that one day. So in a variety of ways, not only just an interdisciplinary approach, but an engagement, because Michael had been an important
figure in the foundation of the IISS Institute for Strategic Studies as well. So I had all of that, and I just assumed that's what one did. It wasn't a. Then I came to King's. Now, the key thing to understand about my arrival at King's, it was only because of Neil Cameron, who sadly died as principal. Neil was a former Chief of Defence Staff. One of the extraordinary things about King's is it kept on recruiting to its top jobs former generals and senior figures in the Ministry of Defence. And Neil was former Chief of Defence Staff. And one of his conditions on his appointment was that he was allowed to fill the chair of War Studies, which had been left unfilled for a number of years. This was controversial, largely because this was a time when the higher education system in the UK, we're talking the early 80s, was in big trouble, was not being properly financed. I remember when the post was advertised, I was told that the money was not there to fill it. So when I arrived and had been appointed, and I should say Neil Cameron came when I was at Chatham House, and Neil Cameron came to see me and said, I'm going to get this post as soon as I'm in charge at King's, and I want you to apply, which is, I was quite a young lad, so it was quite a surprise. But he wanted somebody who knew about nuclear. That was why, because that was my field at the time, and the nuclear debates were pretty intense. So I did, and I got it. But when I was actually in place in April 1982, the first thing I was asked by my head of faculty was to ask my predecessor to take early retirement. Because they couldn't work out how I could be afforded, which pleased to know I refused to do. I thought, well, this isn't a very good start, and we were taught. My first meetings were all about cuts. So I said at one point, look, I've got nothing to cut, but I think I can raise some money. Can I do that instead? And the head of faculty said, well, do me a paper on your wheeler dealing, as that was how it was viewed. So I wheeler dealed, and we brought in some money, I think from Leverhulme at first, which I think helped to pay for Brian. That was how I had to go, so it wasn't a question of having great imperialist ambitions. It was purely defensive to start with. But once I got started, and the Falklands campaign had begun the day I started. I've told this story too many times to repeat it again. I became professor of war studies, and the next day I had a war, about which I knew nothing. I mean, because I've been appointed to deal with nuclear stuff. So if it had been a nuclear war, I'd have been in my element. But I knew damn all about what was going on in the Falklands. But that sort of made military things more interesting to people. It was a tense time in the Cold War, arms control. So we gradually moved, but it wasn't quick. It really wasn't quick. We appointed, I mean, Bram may remember, but we didn't appoint many new people. Barry will remember, we didn't appoint very many new people during the 80s. What made the difference? So this is opportune. What I'm trying to say is it's opportunistic. It's not vision. Yeah. I mean, there's an element of vision, which I'll go on to in a second. A lot of it was just opportunistic. There's two things that made the difference. First was around the early 90s, all of a sudden, higher education expanded, and limits were removed. And it was Phil Sabin, who said to me, why don't we do an undergraduate degree, which had been out of the question up to that point, because we had this idea that you only do war studies when you already had a discipline. And the reason we thought that was quite urgent was because of the end of the Cold War, because people kept on coming to me and saying, haha, you're going to have to call yourself peace studies now. Nobody's going to need you. So we were worried that the MA would be in danger. And the MA had not gone that much above the 20, 30 or so students that we then had. So the undergraduate option seemed to be, again, a matter of survival. Now, what of course happened is the Gulf War, the Balkans. So, you know, it was a busy time. But when we brought in the staff to do the undergraduate degree, they put on MA options. So instead of so all of a sudden we had a much more exciting and thriving MA program. So that was one thing that made that was why we grew. Now the visionary bit, to the extent that it existed, was in two areas. One, I thought we could do more policy related stuff. We should do more outreach, and we did quite a lot of that during the 80s. But it was quite hard work, but we were doing it. So that was always there. And then the Ministry of Defence, it was really Michael Quinlan, who some of you will remember, had decided that they'd had the defence lectureships. Barry was a beneficiary of one of those. That Michael Howard had persuaded Dennis Healy to establish in the late 60s. And they wanted to bring these to an end. So they put a pot of money together for a Centre for Defence Studies, so the competition which we won, notionally with LSE, although they didn't get a lot out of it. So the policy side came along, and then there was the question of military education. Now Brian had got involved in that. When did you go to Camberley? In 87. So Brian had been sort of our emissary to Camberley, and then Jeff Till, who's here as well, who's at Greenwich. We talked quite a lot about the possibilities of making a much bigger pitch for military education, and I think I still have a recollection of walking around Cumberland Lodge with Jeff, sort of plotting on all of this. So that I think, it all started to come together at that period. But you know, it's nice to think that I had a master plan, but I really didn't. A lot of what we did until the early 90s was pretty defensive, I would say. But you had to keep moving in order to stay in business.
Absolutely, but from where we sat, many of us were beneficiaries of this policy world contact. The Center for Defense Studies, where I first had my own research opportunity. Now I'm realizing this is how it came about, but didn't realize it at the time. And at a point in time, this whole business of not wanting to call something war studies. And I think Christopher Dandeka had to take care of that in a sense. You established the International Policy Institute at the time after the Center for Defense Studies. And Kings was saying, close down many of those units because they were not functioning, well, they were not making money, but they were functioning well. And then this remains an issue in several ways today, because as a student and as a PhD student, you're sitting in a policy unit, you're seeing your professors who are in effect dealing directly, intervening in issues of the day. And that's why students want to see, want to be in your classroom.
I mean, I think what I think we've got now, which we didn't have then, because it was all quite small. I mean, which is what made it difficult and created issues of viability. What we have now is big units on the policy stuff. So, you know, one can think back to the origins. I mean, the terrorism group, International Centre for Security, ICSR, the Science and Security Group, which Wynne was very involved in. These were particular initiatives, and we managed one whether to get enough resource in them from outside to give them momentum. And I always felt, and sort of a strong view, that universities are in some ways better than think tanks to do this research, largely because of the students. What you have is a throughput of PhDs, sometimes MA and even undergraduates, who want to get involved and engaged, and keep the things lively and fresh. Whereas the difficulty with a think tank is that you're a bit stuck with your staff, and it's a risk sometimes people to go to a think tank. Whereas you've got more continuity, you can do teaching, you can do other things, or you can spend more time on policy work. So I think there's a model that works now. It took a long time, I think, and it wasn't particularly me who got that going before the model that normally a combination of policy and MA program and some external funding produces some pretty lively groups. I think that's the basis of a lot of the current strength.
Yeah, would you say that War Studies has been, that model and War Studies has been more successful than IISS?
Well, it's different. I mean, IISS is a different sort of organization. When I started, I mean, I spent a year at IISS after Oxford, then it was the place, then it was the place to do things. It had a larger staff than King's did, and it was an international grouping. Its annual conference was the place to be, where you would meet all the great and the good, and leading policymakers would attend, and so it was sort of an international community, but it had a research strength which I think has revived a bit now, but went down for a while. Once there weren't many places that did this. I mean, Mike mentioned Bradford Peace Studies. They did similar sorts of things, but with a much more political agenda about which they argued about all the time, inevitably. Oxford had a bit, LSE had Philip Windsor and a few people, but there really wasn't a lot. I think people forget just how sparse a field that this used to be. So, I mean, one of the good things now is that we're not the only Department of War Studies, which I consider to be an enormous vindication. Other people, it's the best sort of flattery. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit. Let me just say, when I arrived, Donald Cameron Watt, which a number of you will remember, who was a totally eccentric professor of international history at the LSE, but a good friend of the department, was on they had a thing called a Board of War Studies, because it was a University of London degree, not just a King's degree. And Donald was on our board, and he said to me, one of the first meetings, "You've really got to play this War Studies thing down, because you're going to have students coming and protesting about your very existence." And I said, "Well, why? It's very clear what we do." And he wasn't far wrong. And that year there was a move in another thing that doesn't exist anymore, University Congregation of the University of London, which is sort of like the Oxford and Cambridge congregations, which the legitimacy of the people there were never quite understood. But there was a move there to create a Department of Peace Studies in the university. And I rang up the guy and said to him, "Why are you doing this? We teach a lot of this stuff here." "But your war studies." "Yes, I know, but we're not trying to promote it. We're trying to study it." He said, No, you can't have war studies. It's too macho." And I said, "You haven't met me, have you?" But that was a sort of thing that it's completely transformed now. I mean, it's much healthier, I think, throughout the country.
Absolutely. I have to say this posed a real threat to us at some point. The Conflict Security and Development Group, which you encouraged its funding, David said to us, "We will not give money to a unit that sits in the Department of War Studies." Yeah. So we had to move out of War Studies.
Yeah, I remember.
I remember Mervyn had to handle some of this, but when Christopher Dandekar was meant to be closing down some of those units, he preserved CSTG because clearly we were doing a good job as well. All right. But the thing is, even within even within King's, there were always issues about war studies in England. And this is where my next question comes from. At some point, war studies seemed like the jewel in the crown of King's. Shitij was saying he knew war studies and psychiatry, all right, all the way from Canada. How did the coming, the merging of the hospitals and the health aspect influence this? Do you see an arts and sciences that had war studies at the heart of it in terms of reputation and the health on the other side?
Not quite. I mean, I think we were an oddity. I mean, it was odd having war studies. It always seemed to me that it was important to be part of a strong institution. I mean, just to give an example, Aberystwyth, a first-rate department of international relations, has had excellent people there, but as part of for reasons not wholly its fault, a weak institution. And so it always struck me it was important to be part of a stronger institution. As you know, I mean, a lot of my career at King's was not just war studies. I was head of, I set up the School of Social Sciences and then was vice principal for 10 years, during which time I spent a lot of time on the consequences of the merger with the departments. I even appointed a professor of psychiatry at one point. I found that was really helpful, not least in terms of seeing that there were opportunities for connections. And let me just mention one, because I think it's been really important and very valuable, which Shitij will know about, and Chris knows that very well about, which was Simon Wesley in the Institute of Psychiatry, the then Institute of Psychiatry. So this was almost by chance, conversations. So here was a guy looking at Gulf War syndrome and the after effects of the 1991 war, and just sort of a polymathic type anyway, and just generally interested. And we set up this amazing collaboration, which Chris led from the war studies side, that produced amazing work of the policy relevance of sort of helping with interventions with people with mental illness, alcoholism, and so on. I mean, really important piece of work. Well, you couldn't do that unless you've got a strong institution with exciting things going on elsewhere. So I always think although a lot of stuff has come in-house into war studies, lawyers and so on, I still think you get the most out of an institution through the collaborations and the connections within it.
No, absolutely. Maybe, Mike, one more thing before we throw it open. Now, your students, many of us learned at your feet, all right? And the role model question. And I know you can't answer this in any, what do you call it? But it would be good to know which students do you think did that, took from you the way you took from Michael Howard. And of course, I did different things. But maybe Win Bowen could have been do you see that? Where's Win actually? All right, he's in this room. Yeah, because somehow the expansion of war studies, I keep calling it expansion. The reproduction of war studies is about the reproduction of the ideas, ideals, relationships that you and others, of course, built. But without those of us who found different ways of replicating that, we won't have the 1,600 students. By the way, many more women than we ever had, which is something really to celebrate.
Yes, of course, there weren't very many women when I started. It was, in fact, none, apart from the departmental secretary, which tells you how things worked in those days. But we had Saki, who was there as a research student, and then married Mike Dockrell. Both I mean, the department owes an awful lot to both of those, and both sort of still sadly missed. So, I mean, I think, I mean, Shitij said, as Mike said, the ethos, which certainly comes from Michael Howard in the first place, is interdisciplinary, holistic approach, engage, be part of the world. I think those things are part of the cliche, the DNA of the department now. And so people know what, if they come here, that's what they get. I mean, in terms of my own students, and I've now reached the point where some of my own students not only have become professors, but they're now emeritus. So I feel really old. I think, the nicest thing is to see how many of them, including you, have done so well. And it doesn't matter, whether they're doing the same sort of things that I did. I mean, I did my thing, but they're doing their things. And the nicest thing, when it was possible to travel to most places I would go, there'd be a former student around, often doing great things. It remains remarkable. I think when you go to Washington, hopefully I'll get to Washington again next year, that war studies is probably a major contributor to the Washington policy community as any other university. Yeah. They come popping at you from all directions, and all speaking very warmly of their time here and so on. And I think that's great. I mean, I just think it's amazing, the reach of the department. And again, there's nothing to do with me, because this has all happened after I was doing other things. But it's a remarkable feature now. And so it is a reproduction process, sort of amoeba-like, sort of keep on splitting and growing. But it's exciting. But I mean, I get, and I think this is what you can get through being part of the same institution and the same department for such a long period of time. There are benefits in flitting around from place to place. I certainly wouldn't decry that, but that you can see people's development and growth and what they've become, and I take enormous pride in it. And I think anything gives me more pleasure, really, than the success of my students and our students generally.
Mike, one or two anecdotes. When we first came, I hope Noriko is online. Noriko Oish from Japan. That was the only other woman in my class, even though we had a couple of Nigerian generals. Some of them. But international students came. Actually, that was always an international department. But people came to your class and thought you looked like Elton John. so they came for the rock star element.
Now I get told I look like Nikita Khrushchev, so I guess it's...
But now, in later years, Laurie was in Nairobi. I think that was a few years back, about 5 years ago. One of our students went to Laurie, was so respectful, bowing, says, "I've never met a sir in my life." Imagine. So from Elton John in the 80s.
But that was one of the most... I remember you were... I took it... You said there's a tribute to Funmi, that the whole African leadership thing that we had going in Nairobi. But and introduced as commander of the British Empire. I've never felt more foolish in my life.
But many people were in that room, by the way, because they wanted to meet someone with all those titles. Yeah, right. All right. But I think it's time to throw it open.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Funmi and Laurie. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. We have lots of other people in the room who've been in the department as well, so don't be shy. Well, this is an awkward silence, isn't it? There we go, Brian. And then this. Yeah.
You mentioned, Laurie, the undergraduate degree. I think it'd be very interesting for people in the audience to understand how our thinking about the undergraduate degree evolved over time. Because as you rightly say, at the very beginning, and one or two of the staff, I must, including myself, I'm quite happy to admit, were slightly skeptical about an undergraduate degree because Michael Howard had always been insistent that you'd started it as a postgraduate degree after you'd read history or geography or in some cases physics, and then you came to war studies. I think if you'd address that, I'd be very, very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that, to be honest, had been my view. So it's partly a question of needs must. But I think once we started to think about it, it got quite exciting because people had been writing saying, can we do undergraduate degrees? And I think we weren't sure what sort of students we'd get. I mean, you remember, Barry will remember, we interviewed pretty carefully because we got some, let's not put too fine a point on it, militarist nutcases, pretty anxious to do the degree, who you suspect would be quite interested in bomb kits. So we were quite careful. Now, actually, when you look back, that first cohort of 20, I think, students was a remarkable group, including my first ever Major General, I think, as Major General Zach Stenning, who's destined for, who's going to be Commandant at Sandhurst, was in that group. Andy Stewart, who's now professor in Australia, but was part of the department for a long time. Chris Baxter, who was came to be my research assistant on the Falklands. So we had an incredibly good group, which showed that the demand was there and that we could attract good students. And I think that was encouraging, to say the least, a revelation. The other thing that happened a bit later on was a strange LSE who missed a trick, passed on to me a request by two people from Kent who weren't very happy at Kent to join to see if they could find a home at King's, Mervyn Frost and Vivian Jabri. And I hope the LSE kicks themselves, because this was, not only did it mean we had a war studies in a rather traditional sense undergraduate degree, but we soon had an international relations degree. So in terms of the expansion, that was pretty important. And of course, Mervyn has made an enormous contribution to the leadership of the department. So again, come back, the opportunistic side of all of this is really important. You've got to seize the moment when it comes and take your chances. I never thought these were big risks, to be honest, because I thought they would come out all right. The only thing in retrospect was a ridiculous risk to take, was the e-learning degree, War in the Modern World, which is just, there was money around because everybody thought e-learning was the future. And so we put in a bid, and we were the only, I think, more or less respectable degree that had tried to get funds from this, because most of them are sort of accountancy 101 or law 101 sort of things. So they gave us money, which the more and Anna Lucy Norton was did a tremendous job on all of this, but we realized what a task we'd taken on to set up a proper e-learning degree, and it was eating up money. And part of the deal was somehow we were going to have to pay back the loan they gave us, and then the thing went bust, and we never were asked to pay it back. So all of a sudden, something that was slightly bothering me became viable, and it became a great success, so that we were sort of in on the start of that. So that was sort of ambition that actually was probably, if I thought about it more carefully, was too risky. But it turned out all for the good in the end. But in general, I think you just have to, the opportunities are there. and we had a good group of people. I mean, I think, one of the things that's worth just saying, because I see it in other departments when you talk to them, so on, good citizenship is really important. People have got to put in time for the good of the department and not just their own careers. And their own careers would benefit if the departments were strengthened. And there was always, around every head of department, a group of people who were prepared to put the hard yards in and make things happen. And that made an enormous difference.
Thanks.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for this talk. It's been really fun to learn about the history of the department. I'm an MA student who just started barely 2 weeks ago, and I'm really excited now, having heard a bit about the history. And I was wondering if I could hear from you, if you have a piece of advice for a student who's just starting in the department, who doesn't really know where to go, how to find her feet, any advice that you would give for the year ahead? Thank you.
That would be presumptuous in the extremes. It's a great institution, and there's a lot of opportunities. I think, the message, anything is, you don't get opportunities come along, and if you don't take them, you'll regret it afterwards. And that's all I would say, is make the most of it while you're here. I think another part of the ethos of the department is hard work. Again, it often used to strike me when I would go to other departments that our people really worked hard. That they were expected to publish, they were expected to teach, and they did so. And that, I think, went for the students as well. I'm actually quite a strong believer in hard work. I think it can do quite a lot for you. There often aren't easy ways around some of the challenges you face as a student. So in addition to do all the obvious things like enjoy yourself and make the most of London, be prepared to work hard is a bit of advice.
Well, appearing from behind a column, thanks very much, both of you. I think that leads nicely into our final speaker, Kat Bell, who is chair of the new KCL alumni branch for war studies and an MA graduate. So I don't know if you have wise words for our new MA student, or if not, I can...
Thank you, Michael. I'll be happy to talk to you after this if you want to pull my ear on any advice. But what I would like to say to the group and for everyone watching in TV land, for all of the UK-based and global war studies alumni, we're going to make connections a bit easier now. In collaboration with the War Studies Department and with the Alumni Office at KCL, we are launching a branch within the KCL Alumni Association, KCLA. And it's serendipitous that we are doing this in conjunction with the 60th anniversary of the department. So for those of you who are interested in being involved or learning more, you can find us on social media at KCLA online. And we also have a website in development. So please reach out. There are a couple of dates that you might want to jot down in your diary if you are interested in participating. January 19th and March 9th, we have a couple of 60th anniversary seminars planned, and we are working with the faculty to include some alumni events to follow each of those seminars. So stay tuned and please reach out if you'd like to learn more. Thank you.
Well, it just leaves me to draw this part of the evening to a close. I would thank everyone again for coming. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Shitij. Thank you to Lizzie and the team who got this together. If you've not seen it yet, do have a look at the booklet. It's online as well. I'm not quite sure where, but Lizzie will tell us. If you go to the online one, it has a fantastic page turning sound as well. Which I actively encourage you to look at the online version. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. Please move across to the other side now where there's refreshments and portraits of Mervyn and also Saki. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.